and we will listen to Mandy Daly on family supportive services and parental involvement.
An old friend of mine, and it's very nice to see you. Of course, you are a mother of a 25 plus 6-week girl, and you also been founded the collaborative multi-stakeholder platform in Ireland, the Irish Neonatal Health Alliance. I think is fantastic. Advocacy for education and training and research, and also you are from the beginning of AFC now very much involved. You are a member of the advisory board and chair committee of the GLANS, and you've published several papers together with others in Lancet, British Medical Journal, and so forth. We're very, very happy to have you here, Mandy. Also a member of the FNI board, the NITCA Federation International Board. Welcome, Mandy. Go ahead.
Well, the statement of the standards I'll be talking about today for the parental involvement, that parents are members of the caregiving team and with individualized support assume the primary role in the provision of care of their infant and are active partners in decision-making processes. The statement of the standard for family support services states that the family receives care in an environment where their socioeconomic, mental health, and spiritual needs are supported. But how does this translate into practice? What I'd like to do is to walk you through my journey about prematurity and highlight those missed opportunities that would have changed our perception of the world of prematurity, but more importantly, would have actually had an impact on our outcomes as a family. In 2006, after 10 years, I finally managed to get myself pregnant. And for the first 13 weeks, it was a really, really happy event. Unfortunately, at that point, I turned into a high-risk pregnancy. I had a massive bleed. And when I presented at our local neonatal unit, I was very surprised at the reaction to me. It was just assumed that I was having a miscarriage. And for me, that was the most devastating thing that could have happened at that point in my life. I wasn't viewed as somebody who was going to be getting any additional care. As a mother to be, it wasn't all about me. I was admitted, I was told this was most likely a miscarriage and that they would keep me in hospital until the severe bleeding had come to an end. I had to demand to get an ultrasound carried out. The bed that I was sitting in the emergency unit was located next to an ultrasound machine, and I'm a radiographer, and I had pleaded with them to just let me see the baby, just to see was the baby alive, and it didn't happen. They refused and refused until ultimately I said I will do it myself, which obviously they didn't allow, but they did actually agree to do an ultrasound, and the baby was okay. So for me, that was a huge reassurance. That one moment in time shattered all of my expectations. I assumed my baby was going to be dead, but just by reassuring me through that ultrasound, it gave me that little bit of mental strength to continue on. I was hospitalized for 10 days, but again, in a ward with other parents with new babies, and that was incredibly difficult. My obstetrician felt that at all points this was going to terminate in a miscarriage, so the relationship between us was quite strained. For me, I needed that reassurance. Even if it was going to end in a miscarriage, I just felt as a mom, my fears and my needs weren't being met. And unfortunately, for the rest of the pregnancy, that scenario continued. So at the end of my 10-day stay in hospital and I was discharged home, my obstetrician said he would see me at week 28 if the baby was still alive. Now, that was a total of 15 weeks after I'd been admitted. And even those 10 days, bleeding every single day, waiting for the baby to die, it was emotionally and physically draining. It was very lonely, it was isolating. I'd never met anybody who had had a pregnancy and had continued to bleed and had had a successful pregnancy. So I was very much alone and I felt quite unsupported. I took the decision myself at that point to put myself on bed rest, which I did for the next 12 weeks. It was really difficult because I didn't feel anybody was supporting my actions. I did manage to change obstetricians and to find a really kind obstetrician who would sneak me in every Tuesday to give me that weekly ultrasound to reassure me that the baby was still growing, the baby was still healthy. They didn't have any reason for my bleeding. They couldn't stop it, but they felt as long as the baby was continuing to grow, they were going to let me come into the hospital every week. It was very, very difficult because every single time I got up off my couch, I felt this could be the very end of my pregnancy and I was going to be alone. And again, there was nobody out there. There was nobody to reach out and talk to. There was nobody to reassure me. That one trip to the hospital every week was my only lifeline. It was the only thread that kept me mentally going. It would keep me going for 24, 48 hours. And then the anxiety would overcome me again, the fear of losing the baby. So any joy that would have been expected to be associated with pregnancy was completely annihilated. At no point was the prospect of a preterm delivery even suggested to me, which I found unusual afterwards, I suppose, in hindsight. I often blame pregnancy hormones for my brain not thinking properly, but it possibly was that they didn't think I'd get to viability and it was just never discussed. So I wasn't really prepared for what lay ahead. And what did lay ahead was at 25 plus 6, I had a placenta abruption and I had to travel 160 miles in our car to get to a tertiary unit. Unfortunately, I was located in an area that wouldn't have been able to care for a baby so small. I didn't have the birth I wanted, neither did my daughter. It was an emergency cesarean section. We both faced the prospect of possibly dying. I felt a bit removed from the entire situation simply because there was a lot of people around. There was a lot of frantic people working around me to keep me alive, to keep my baby alive. And I was very, very scared. When she was delivered lifeless and had to be resuscitated. So I didn't have the opportunity to see her or touch her. And I think what sticks with us parents is somebody else has had that first cuddle. Somebody else has touched my baby. My baby has smelled somebody else at delivery, not me. And there are moments you can never get back. They always stay with me. She was obviously whisked to NICU and it would be another day before I got to see her. I remember lying on that bed after delivering her and feeling like a piece of meat. You know, the most important thing seemed to be treating my daughter. I was secondary. And at the time, it didn't bother me. But in hindsight, I felt my mental energy sapping out of my body at that point. I had managed to get myself to delivery just about mentally. And I had no idea what lay ahead. I didn't know if she was dead or alive. And it was like, it just got worse and worse. I felt like I was spiraling into a much deeper pit. It would have really helped, I guess, had I had somebody supporting me throughout the pregnancy, supporting me and preparing me for what lay ahead, supporting me to understand what the delivery room would look like, what the NICU would look like. There was nothing there. There was never any discussion about the birth plan. It just simply was, I guess, perhaps I didn't think it was going to happen, but when it did, we were all pretty much unprepared for it. That photograph of me there in the corner is one of the few occasions I did get a chance to meet my daughter when she was very small. As you can see, she's on CPAP, so that would have been at least more than 4 weeks after she was born. I look absolutely exhausted. Any photographs of me at that time are really distressing to look at. So what was life like in the NICU? I remember being in a ward with mums, all of who had their babies who had just delivered, and I was stuck in a corner with curtains drawn around my bed, shattered physically, shattered emotionally, not knowing how I was going to get through this. And the very first thing that was delivered to my bed was a breast pump. It was rolled in, there was very little discussion, and I was told, we need milk. And there again, I felt almost detached from the situation, that I was a conduit for some process, but I wasn't part of it. It was really hard to hear doctors come to my bedside, pull back the curtains and say, where's your baby? So little things like that, being placed in a ward with other parents, healthcare professionals not reading my notes prior to coming to my bed, they all stick with us parents. We're quite fragile emotionally at that point, and it doesn't take a lot to keep chipping away at that mental health. For me, I had absolutely no idea what lay ahead. Thankfully, there was one midwife who accompanied me to the NICU to meet my daughter, but I didn't know what she looked like. We entered a room with 10 babies, and I was happy to be given any of those babies at that point. Not that I didn't care, but I felt I needed to connect with the baby that I had delivered 24 hours earlier, and it hadn't happened. I obviously wasn't allowed to touch my daughter. She was on a ventilator, and it was heartbreaking to see her, because the first thing that goes through your mind as a mom is, this is my fault. I've caused you this pain. And this is what you've known from the very first time you were born. So up to that point, there was no love, there was no warmth, it was just pain. And that still stays with you as a parent. It doesn't leave. You can suppress it over the years, but it always bubbles back to the surface. Life in the NICU was hard. We spent 4 months traveling to and from the NICU. I would be there every single morning at 8 o'clock. Even accessing the NICU was distressing. It was a long corridor. I had to buzz a doorbell to be permitted access to visit my child. And at no point did I ever feel part of that caregiving team. I was a visitor. I was excluded during rounds. I was excluded during staff handover. If there was a baby being treated for whatever reason, parents were asked to leave. It was a difficult situation. I know it was 13 years ago, and I know it has slightly improved, but the access is key, I think, for parents. If you get to the door of a NICU and you have to buzz in and be permitted, it changes the equity of where you stand in reference to the other people who work behind that door. And if we talk about equitable partners and primary caregivers, we need to treat everybody the same. And I'm constantly asking NICUs now, please give your parents the same access as you give your staff. And it's really difficult for them to make that change. There's that security issue that they find it very difficult to get around, but it means a lot to us. It means we're being welcomed into an area as parents. I still want to be my daughter's parent. It's very difficult because I don't know where to start when I'm a new mom in the NICU. I'm also battling the fear that she's going to die. I don't want to bond with my baby because if she dies, I'm going to be so heartbroken. I'm guilty because of where she is. I'm helpless because I don't have any information. I don't know how to parent. I need the help of people to support me in that situation, to guide me through that altered parenting role, to help me find me as my mum. I know I'm a mum internally, but I can't express it externally because it's just not within me to work within a NICU environment. For 3 months, I sat at that bedside every single day for 14 hours for the first 4 weeks, desperate, absolutely desperate to hold her because she was on a ventilator. Our unit didn't allow ventilated babies to have skin-to-skin care. So all I could do was express milk in what can only be described as a closet. It was the tiniest little room that connected our SCBU, which is our special care baby unit, to our NICU. And it was a walkway for all the healthcare professionals. It wasn't very conducive to expressing milk. It was really small and cramped, and there were 2 pumps available to well over 30 parents. It was really difficult. It was the only thing I could do, so I made myself do it. What I do look back on is the lack of knowledge I had with respect to nutrition. At no point was the importance of express breast milk discussed with me. It was forced upon me. I would go so far as to say, in hindsight, I am so guilty that I didn't make a better effort. I did reach out to see if there was lactation support, but it wasn't available in my hospital. It was really hard to express breast milk at 3 o'clock in the morning, having had a bad day in the NICU. What would have helped would have been camera access. I would have loved to be able to look at my baby at 3 in the morning. That might have helped me express a bit more milk. It would have put my mind at ease because every time I left that NICU, I was just waiting to get home so I could ring the NICU to see what had happened in that 2-hour journey between the last time I saw her and then. So I think we really do need to embrace technology to help parents. It helps their physical health. It also helps us emotionally recover from what's going on. As it is, we feel disconnected from our role as parents, and it's difficult for us to reconnect with that because none of us has read the book before we've had that baby about delivering preterms. It's a very different scenario. And I spent a lot of my time confused. I observed my daughter for 14 hours a day, as I said, for the first 4 weeks, not being able to hold her. She seemed to be very distressed. I kept a diary every day. I recorded all my observations, only because it was all I could do. But internally, something was making me do that. And in hindsight, having spent the last 13 years learning about infant cues and learning how to read infant cues, I know that my baby was talking constantly to me, but as a parent, I didn't have that ability to interpret her behaviors. And there lies another element of guilt. Had I been able to recognize her distresses, which were a lot, perhaps I could have comforted her in some way. You know, there's no reason why I couldn't have held her skin to skin care. She would have benefited, I would have benefited, my milk would have been better, she'd have gained weight better, she wouldn't have such severe BPD. There are a whole gamut of reasons why I should have been able to be her mom at the time. Again, I realise it's 13 years ago and times have changed in some respects, but there are plenty of units still who don't actually embrace kangaroo mother care as a form of intervention, who don't look at EBM as a nutrition or as a medical emergency. So there are lots and lots of things that can still be done. It was overwhelming. Having to recover from a cesarean section or put the recovery on hold and do 14-hour days, having a 2-hour trip to the hospital, a 2-hour trip home. But I felt I needed to be there, even though I was a passive bystander for much of it. I needed to be there in case something happened and I missed out on it. It was really hard. And I guess I would have been one of those people in the NICU who would have been constantly asking for things to change. We had a parent room, again, no bigger than a closet, where we could have a cup of tea, but we weren't allowed to bring food into it. It's already been mentioned today. If you want me to breastfeed my baby, my premature baby who needs breast milk, you need to have conditions that are conducive to producing the absolute optimum quality breast milk. And that means facilities for families to eat and to drink, to take time out. It's a very intensive environment. A lot of you work in this, so you know what I'm speaking about. But for us too, it's intensive. We need time away from it to recoup, to think about what's going on, process what's happening, and I guess to regroup that energy, that little bit of energy that we have. In our NICU, there were only a certain number of chairs. Not every incubator had a chair assigned to it, so you would do your best to get into the NICU in the mornings early because you wanted to get a chair on the off chance somebody might allow you to kangaroo mother care. That's just wrong. You know, kangaroo mother care is a medical intervention and it ought to be seen as that. I would have loved to have become involved in the cares of my daughter much earlier. It would have helped my recovery. It would have helped me understand my role better as a parent. I appreciate some parents sometimes are so scared that they don't want to touch their baby, but that's where the team and the NICU need to come together and offer that support to families to understand what's happening to their baby and allow them to understand that bonding and attachment can still happen and to facilitate that process. Nurturing our kids not only nurtures them, it nurtures us. It's a fulfilling experience, and if it doesn't happen in the NICU, we are looking at families who are damaged upon discharge, but we are giving them this huge burden of having to care for a most likely a medically vulnerable child, and when they themselves can't take care of themselves. Again, in our NICU, we were constantly asked to leave for rounds and left for staff changeover. We weren't allowed access to our children's medical records. I do have a medical background, and on the few occasions that I snuck a peek, the medical records were snatched from my hands, and the excuse that was used was, we don't want you to misinterpret the content. You know, if you want me to be the best mum that I can be, I need to be part of that team. I need to be part of the decision-making process, and I need to feel that I'm equal. At no point in my journey did I feel equal. I often felt I was in the way, or because of my medical background, people kept their distance from me for fear I might ask a question about my child's condition. I find, looking back, there was a lot of inconsistencies. For me, it depended on what nurse was on duty, what you as a parent would or wouldn't be allowed to do on the day. And again, that's very distressing as a parent. I'm learning to become a parent in an altered environment. With one nurse is giving me different information from the next. There was no written information for us. There was no online access. I would have really benefited from a structured, I suppose, parent education program, if you want to call it that, that would follow me through my journey as a parent in the NICU, where I'm acquiring different competencies and I'm becoming more confident, because at the point of discharge, that's it, the support ends and I'm taking over. And I do remember leaving the hospital after 4 months thinking, I'm surely they've made a huge mistake. They're letting me bring this baby home. It was Christmas Eve and I had no idea how to care for her. I was terrified I would kill her. And I remember getting to the hospital door and thinking, there's nobody following me here. They're actually really letting me home. And one part of me is resounding and joyous, but there's another part of me that's gripped with such a awful fear and anxiety that if anything happens, it's all going to be my fault. And it would have been, I guess. All of this, I suppose, has led me on to look at, in hindsight, at our experience, where I was as a person, what I had felt as a mum. You know, there was nobody ever asked me how I felt. How was I doing? And every day, having gone through a high-risk pregnancy where my self-esteem was being chipped away every day by a set of circumstances that I had no control over, nobody at any point stood back and said, how are you doing? You know, what can I do to help you get through this? Thankfully, I was financially okay in that it wasn't going to be such of a burden for us, but there are so many families out there now we know who lose their homes, who sleep in cars because their baby has been transferred to a NICU that's far away from home, who suffer enormous financial loss as a result of having a preterm baby. It is really important that when we look at this baby in our NICU, that we just don't look at them independently. They are part of a family unit. They are part of them. There's a mum, there's probably a dad, there could be two mums, there could be two dads, their siblings, their grandparents. The ripple effect of prematurity does not stop. It starts at the infant and it keeps spreading outwards. And it will be very helpful for everybody if a support structure were put in place in terms of having, for mum, a psychologist during pregnancy and after pregnancy, and most certainly after discharge, because a lot of our issues, we tend to internalize them while the baby's in the NICU, and it can take a long time for us to allow those issues rise to the surface, and for many, it's really, really difficult to process them. Having a social worker that's designated to your NICU would be incredibly useful. Families often don't know what entitlements there may be out there for them, and to take that burden away from them would allow them to concentrate their energies on learning to bond with their child, learning to be a parent in that environment. I had never met anybody who'd had a preterm baby, who'd had a really high-risk pregnancy, who'd had a pregnancy similar to mine. I felt alone, and I felt I was the only one that this was happening to. Now I know I'm not, and I know we have so many preterm babies in the world, but it would have certainly helped me to speak with somebody who knew what I was going through and who wasn't just a healthcare professional, who was a parent who had endured the pain and the heartbreak that I had endured. And yes, unfortunately, some babies don't actually make it, but it would have been really helpful for me to connect with somebody. After discharge, it was a shock to me how little support there was. There are some photographs of me that I don't like sharing because it's me looking at my baby in her little chair at home, and the look on my face is one of horror because I've realized that I'm in the community now. I'm the full-time carer for this baby. It's my first time in 4 months being a full-time carer, and there's nobody looking over my shoulders. What if something goes wrong? I can honestly say I don't think I slept for 3 or 4 years after my daughter was born home. Now, neither did she. She had a whole host of medical problems which have led to that. But I guess for me, had I been a stronger parent, had I been better prepared, more competent, and I guess more confident in my ability to parent, it would have changed how I enjoyed motherhood, because I did not enjoy it. I say it time and time again, for the first 3 years, I did not feel like a mum. I felt like a carer. With that responsibility of having to care for this child, there were no joyous moments. There were no times when we could sit and have fun. She had so many medical complications post-discharge, which is an entirely different conversation, that it just took away from the whole joy of parenting. And for me, it was one stumbling block after another, from the high-risk pregnancy, the emergency delivery, the time in the NICU. You know, the NICU is our home for 4 months. It doesn't feel like a home. It's meant to be for families. We are growing a little baby together, the entire team, mums, dads, healthcare professionals, but it doesn't feel like a home to us. We often feel like visitors, and I think it's really important that we step outside our roles and ask, if this were me, how would I like it to be? You know, my hospital didn't have any family accommodation. It was a 2-hour trip both ways for me to get to the hospital every day. Having had a cesarean section, there was no quiet space for me to go and have that cry. I had to be really strong for those 4 months because I had no other choice. It would have been lovely to have access to the canteen. I had to fight for access to the staff canteen, and in our unit. We weren't allowed, up to the point that we were in the unit, parents were not allowed to use the same canteen as staff, until I had a row with one of them and explained, you want me to express milk, you want me to be here for my baby, meet me halfway, let me go and get my meals in the canteen. There were plenty of parents in our unit who had nowhere to wash clothes. They were staying in hotels, they were in bed and breakfasts. I remember taking lots and lots of patients' clothes home with me because I could. That's wrong. It's an additional stress for parents. And again, would you like that for yourself if you were in their situation? Needless to say, there was never a sibling in sight of our hospital. And these are children who are at home for 4, 5, 6 months, who apparently have a brother or sister, who have never met them. Can you imagine you being like that? You don't have the emotional or the mental capacity to understand that circumstance, to vocalize how you're feeling, and then perhaps the baby dies. What happens then? So I think, again, it's about not just focusing on the baby, it's focusing on the family and understanding that the family is a much, much greater unit than just the baby. What we do to the baby affects the family. The family are the ones we're trying to build and nurture so that they can then take that baby into the community and raise it to the best of their ability. It makes perfect sense. We all share the same goals. I don't want to be in the NICU. You don't want me to be there any longer than I have to be there. I want, as a parent, to be able to know my baby, to get to know my baby. I can do that if you teach me how to read my baby's cues. I know that my daughter was in immense pain during her time in the NICU. I have the notes in my daily journal that tell me that. At the time, I didn't realize that her behaviors were indicating the distress and pain she was in. But now, in hindsight, I can read those notes and go, well, nobody was reading her cues at that point. As a parent, it makes you feel like a failure. And it's so basic. As a mother, even for me to record what I was observing, there was obviously something within me that understood that there was something happening to my baby, that there was a need to record this. Perhaps, maybe it's just coincidence. We know that by involving parents as early as possible in the cares as primary caregivers, that it reduces the length of hospital stay. We know that these babies do not come back in for readmission afterwards. We're sending these parents home prepared, they're competent, and they're confident. The science is there. We know they have improved behavior and long-term cognitive development. It absolutely enhances the bonding and attachment process. I sat for 4 weeks outside my baby's incubator, pleading to even touch her. There were days when I was so distressed, I would have just picked her up and left because I hadn't touched her. I was her mom, and I was watching these people every single day for 4 whole weeks do what I should be doing. They were touching her, they were changing her nappy, they were feeding her, they were taking bloods. She didn't know any love. And that's the biggest regret that I have, is that every human interaction she had brought pain. And you can't undo that. You know, every mom with a new baby wants to enjoy motherhood. What can we do to facilitate that process? There is so much we can do. We can make them feel like moms in the NICU. We can adapt the environment to ensure that these parents feel like parents, that they're confident, that it reduces their stress. My God, when you get a child home after 4 months in hospital, you don't know what the stress is like until you're home and you're by yourself. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning and something happens to your baby, and you are being faced with making that decision whether to act or to hold back. It's really difficult. So if we can do something to ensure that parents feel competent or can actually take charge and responsibility of taking care of their child when they're home, we ought to do it. It's our right to do it, I think. Again, holding baby in skin-to-skin care, it improves breastfeeding rates. If my baby's breastfeeding better, she'll gain weight better, she'll get out of hospital sooner, she'll have less infections, she'll have less chance of BPD, neck. It's almost like a cycle here. There are so many benefits to having parents as the center point of the caregiving team. It seems incredible that we haven't done it to date, or we haven't embraced it in the same respect. What I'd like to do now is I would like to read out some statements that parents have made about their time in the NICU and something that they would like healthcare professionals to understand. It's written by a girl called Jodie DeLiesel. I need to be present. Please do not tell me to go home and rest while I can. If I say I need to be here, then I need to be here. My heart is sleeping in that incubator. My hands are empty, and my head can only feel clear if I'm by my baby's bedside. I'm grieving. This is not what I had planned and dreamed about. My hopes for healthy and natural delivery were crushed by this unknown NICU world. Please be patient and kind while I try to grasp what all this means, and while I mourn the loss of a normal pregnancy and delivery. This is supposed to be a happy time. I will get there, but I'm not ready yet. Please understand. I feel lost. The NICU is somewhere I never expected to be, and seeing my baby struggle is the hardest thing I've had to face as a parent. This roller coaster ride is tough. Please be there for me if I need you. You may not know what to say, and that's okay. Just knowing that I have your support if I need it can make all the difference to me on the hard days. I need to be part of my baby's team. I may not be a medical professional, and this may be the first NICU baby I've been around, but it's my baby, and I need to be included in the care and decision-making on a daily basis. Please respect this important aspect and see my baby not only as your patient, but as a child that is loved beyond measure. I will learn. I may not completely understand everything that's going on. If I don't, please teach me. I need to learn. Please take the time to help me so that I can be the very best advocate for my baby, not only while in your care in the NICU, but what I need to know to meet my baby's needs once we're discharged from the hospital. Let me be a parent. I know I may take more time to do the little things like changing a diaper or take a temperature. But if you encourage me to do these tasks for my baby, I will feel more connected and comfortable. These moments will be my memories I will cherish for a lifetime. Please be consistent. I understand that the NICU has a vast array of staff, from nurses with different backgrounds and philosophies, doctors and therapists whom I only see from time to time. But if you can all get on the same page when it comes to the care of my baby, I won't feel so lost and confused with the expectations and the goals for me and my child. I need to trust you. I've handed over the most precious gift that I've been given to you. I know that you are only human too, but I need to know that you will do everything in your power to make my baby well, to grow and to succeed. Please treat my child like they're one of your own, and know that I'll be forever grateful for the love and care you show while you work. I have hope. I don't really want to hear the statistics all the time. They scare me. They cut the thread that ties my hopes to my dreams. I understand I need to know when things are bad, but please remember, I also need to know when things are good. Please don't just break the bad news to me, but help me mend my heart with the happy stuff too. I thank you for every bit of what you do, for every aspect of what you give, every day of yours you dedicate to my child. The NICU is tough, and no parent wants to be behind its doors. But I'm happy that it exists, that you're here, and that you work hard every day, not only to help my baby survive, but to thrive. And I'd like to add to that, it was really important for me as a parent to be able to find out, take a positive out of every day. And sometimes just not moving anywhere can be considered a positive, and telling parents that even if the baby hasn't deteriorated, hasn't gained weight, hasn't moved up the scale, by staying still, that's still a positive. Because I think we need to leave the NICU every day. We need to leave those closed doors with something in our hearts that we can take home and hold on to. And I guess always remember that every action you take when interacting with these babies has a consequence. It can be a negative, a positive, or a cumulative, and that these consequences can impact the lives of these children and their families forever. So take that moment, step back, ask yourself, what will the consequences of my interaction be? Will it be positive? And try to make it a positive one for us as families. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mandy.